I'm so grateful to all of you for being here with us, and I'm especially grateful to my friend and teacher and colleague, Rabbi Elliot Tepperman. Rabbi Elliot Tepperman is a graduate of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. He has been the rabbi of B'nai Keshet, which is a vibrant Reconstructionist congregation in Montclair, New Jersey, for 23 years. I remember being at your installation, Elliot, Elliot is a former RRA president. He is a co-chair of the Rabbinic and Cantorial Cabinet of J Street. He is on the slate of Hatikva, as am I. And another way that Ellie and I have the opportunity to work together sometime, in addition to our Reconstructionist connections and our Progressive Israel Network and connections, is he is on the board of Join for Justice, which is an extraordinary social justice organization that trains activists. And I think that we're trying to mobilize some of the skills and approaches that Join uses for the efforts to organize for the World Zionist Congress, which will be brought to life in Jerusalem in October of 2025, and we are currently in the election season. This is a set of very old, very arcane, not so transparent institutions. At the center is the World Zionist Organization that sponsors the World Zionist Congress. So tonight is an opportunity to kind of unpack what those institutions are, why they matter, which is a case that we have to make, I think, and why your voting in this election really, really matters. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to invite Elliot to give his stump speech for why vote in the World Zionist Congress elections in 2025.
So thank you. Thank you so much. It's really lovely to be here, and I really appreciate all the many people who've set aside time to listen tonight, and it's really nice to be with you, Deborah. I'll just say a few important things that I think really matter. So I've often counseled my congregation that we should be pretty humble when we're kind of arguing about Israel. I think we often have arguments about Israel and Palestine as though our arguments might impact what's happening on the ground there, and as though like this is our contribution is to argue with passion. But in fact, it's very hard in most cases for us in the United States as individual citizens to impact what's happening on the ground there. Even if we're able to somehow change the nature of American politics so that it would then change the nature of how American government impacts Israel, it's just a very distant path. But this is one of those few places where it's not true. So we actually have a vote, and there's kind of two main modes of power, right? People power and monetary power that can impact things anywhere in the world, but that's also true in Israel. And by getting a lot of votes in the World Zionist Congress, we show that we have numerical power, and then that translates immediately into the power to allocate funds in such a way as to impact decisions and impact the way policy is carried out within Israel. So the World Zionist Congress was set up with an understanding that the Jewish people of the world have a fate that is deeply intertwined, and that Israel was not a state like every other state, that Israel was a state that mattered to Jews even who did not live there, and whose policies impact Jews even who do not live there, and whose future should be in part determined by the Jews of the world, not only by the people who are choosing to live in Israel. So the World Zionist Congress is an institution that expresses that interconnection between the Jews of Israel and the Jews of the diaspora. It was set up over 100 years ago as an institution so that we could have impact. And we're living in a moment where I think many of us very much want to have a deep impact on the state of affairs in Israel. So just to note that there are 22, 21 slates running this year, which is, I think, like a 50% increase in number of slates from last time. There's been an over 50% increase in voting already. We don't know yet where those votes are coming from for sure. So we want to make sure the votes are going to be allocated, rather the seats are going to be allocated based on our proportion of the vote, the proportion that our slate gets. So when you vote for Hatikva, you have a very strong opportunity to do something in just a few seconds that you know could have meaningful long-term impact over the next 5 years, allocating $1 billion year after year after year. So some of the things that the Hatikva slate believes in. We believe that all citizens of Israel should be treated equally, as it says in the Declaration of Independence, that they all have equal civil and human rights. We believe in a policy that is meant to prevent the permanent annexation of the West Bank, and that the occupation of the West Bank needs to end. We believe in a Zionism that includes and fully embraces gender equity, gender rights, LGBTQI freedom, racial and economic justice, and that sees that those things are inextricably intertwined. The Hatikva slate is made up of such great organizations. I'll just name a few. Reconstructionist Judaism, right at the top of the list, right? I mean, hey, and I just want to note, maybe I said this a second ago, but I can't help but think. I remember learning about how Kaplan had this vision of a worldwide democratic Congress that would that he was willing to submit to if it was truly a democratic body that would impact the Jewish life. Well, that doesn't quite exist, but this is about as close to something like that existing as we have in the universe. So the fact that Reconstructionist Judaism is participating makes a lot of sense. We're made up of groups like Trua and J Street and NCJW, and those are just naming a few. You can look for the whole slate, but when you think about the groups that you are most likely to feel affiliated with, there's a high likelihood you're going to see them on our slate. The Hatikva slate is working to firmly commit itself to all of the work that is happening on the ground to bring home the hostages, to make sure that that is the top priority, to make sure that the war comes to an end that is currently happening. The Hatikva slate is working with Israelis on the ground to protect equal rights for equal work, to protect rights for women, to enforce an end to gender segregation. And the Hatikva slate supports religious pluralism, that's just the norm of what we come to expect as Reconstructionists, but which is just a fact that has to be fought for in Israel. And finally, we support a path to security for all the inhabitants of the land. We support a pathway that ensures freedom and security and sovereignty for all Israelis and all Palestinians. And that doesn't mean necessarily any particular path, whether that's, 2-state or 23-state solution, but it means that we need to be making choices that make way for that vision to be possible. So that's my short, standing on one foot answer as to why voting in the Hatikva slate is really important and why voting is important, and specifically voting for our slate.
Bravo, well done. I'm really you did a wonderful job of presenting it, and I'm very proud to be a part of the collection of organizations and the collection of individuals who make up the Hatikva slate. And we had input into Reconstructing Judaism had input into creating the platform. Very much inspired, I think, by Israel's Declaration of Independence, and how both the principles that led to the creation of the Declaration of Independence in 1948, and I think our understanding of how those principles and those values could and should be brought to life in the current moment. And there are some precise continuities, and there are some facts on the ground that were, the way evolution happens, that were unimaginable to the circle that created that Declaration of Independence 77 years ago. I want to share with all of you that Elliot and I, as we were preparing for this event, we are entirely united in wanting to be as affirmative and as positive as we can be in this presentation. And that can be a little bit hard, because what I want to share with we will probably make our way through a little bit of a slide deck, but as much as possible, we're hoping that we can be a little bit in conversation with each other, and then with the questions that you put forward. The institutions that are populated and funded by these elections, by the results of these elections, are old institutions, and they're pretty opaque. We come in a world that really, really values transparency as much as possible, and we want to try to make the workings of our institutions as open as they can be. And that is not that's not I would say, because I sit on I'm the deputy chair of by dint of the last World Zionist Congress elections, I am the deputy chair of a committee on the Jewish Agency for Israel, which is one of the organizations that gets populated by the results of these elections. And the committee that I help to run is on ethics, governance, and standards. And we're working really hard to introduce transparency into all of these institutions. And so these are old, like 100-plus-year-old institutions. When you see pictures of Herzl on the balcony in Basel in 1897, he was at the first World Zionist Congress. I think it had probably 20 people. It was not a huge thing. This is much, much bigger. But it's in a direct line. But that said, that when I went to the first World Zionist Congress in 2015 as a Reconstructionist rep, I really was reminded very much of those stories of conventions, of political convention in the 19th century, of people men with cigars smoking, and the real deals happening in the back room. So it is both. If we were creating institutions to capture the voices and capture the breadth of worldwide Jewry, to address all of our concerns, including on the ground in Israel, the way Elliot was just describing, these are not necessarily the institutions we would create. I feel really, really certain about that. These part of the impulse behind certainly the Hatikva slate and other slates is to try to go for greater transparency, try to go for greater accountability, and try to make certain that the $1 billion that's going to be apportioned out over the next 5 years is done so in transparent ways, in accountable ways. I'm going in this way because there are a couple of questions that have come in already that I want to try to address. The slate, there are, as Elliot said, more than 20 slates. And some of them are, even as we have put together an extraordinary coalition of amazing organizations, there are other slates that are very that are closely aligned to the Hatikva slate, not identical in composition, not identical in language, not identical in orientation, and there is a distinction, I think, between the slates and the platforms, and then what happens on the ground. So in my ideal world, I would have different structures and different organizations that would address these questions. I'm not queen of the universe. We don't have that ideal world. In my ideal world, we would all of the liberal forces, both the liberal religious and the liberal and progressive political, would be in one super slate. But I'll take you back to that $1 billion that Elliot mentioned. At the end of the day, this is about how that money gets allocated, including to organizations on the ground in Israel. It includes what we would maybe use the language of political patronage seats within the World Zionist Organization, within the Jewish Agency. And so it gets, there is, even among the closest of friends and the most aligned allies, there is a competition for resources, which is one of the reasons why even as we will caucus very closely, we have in the past several years, in the past several Congresses, and we will, whatever the results are in this one, we will caucus very closely with our closest allies, which include the Reform Movement, the ARTSA slate, which is what the Reconstructionist movement has run on in previous years. We will caucus very closely with Merkaz, which represents worldwide conservative Judaism. But we are, and there is significant overlap in the platforms, but the results of these elections will yield both the allocation of jobs and resources on the ground in Israel. And that, I'm really sad to say, worked against creating a super slate of all of the progressive and liberal groups in these elections.
If I could just,
yeah, go.
I just want to jump in quickly to say that, so because of the kind of power dynamics that Deborah just described. So on the one hand, we're great friends, right? I mean, it's like at B'nai Keshet, in the town that we're in, we have tremendous relationships with the conservative and the Reform congregation. We do all kinds of things differently. And at the end of the day, we're all have our own vision that we're trying to make happen. So one of the questions was whether there was a danger of weakening the platforms and splitting the vote. In the end, the groups that have a shared vision are going to work together.
Right.
And as long as there's, let's just imagine, I don't know what it is, but let's just say there's 50,000 votes for all of those groups together, those groups will be well represented, right? However, if you are here, there's a high likelihood that you are in alignment with the values of Hatikva and with our slate, which isn't radically different from ARTSA, but is a different. And if we show a disproportionate ability to get votes compared to, say, the Reform Movement, which has far more resources than we do, that's going to increase the power of our vision to be heard when we're caucusing and when we're trying to fill in some of these board chairs that will be held over the next 5 years, and when we're trying to decide what kinds of platforms we're moving forward with. So, and we'll actually literally have more seats. So people like Deborah will actually be there with Jeremy Ben-Ami and with Jill Jacobs and with all of the various leaders from the Hatikva slate will be present, or, or other people who they work with and represent their values to be able to do the on the ground. It's like a Congress, like political caucusing that's going to happen around various proposals.
Right, that's exactly right. And so I've been in this position for almost 12 years, fairly astonishingly, and this will be my, believe it or not, I think I believe it's my 4th World Zionist Congress. There was one in 2015, shortly after I started. There was one in 2020 that was kind of sidelined by the pandemic, so we did it virtually, and it was very unsatisfying. Because one of the extraordinary things about it, even as it is a lot of political theater in the actual convening, is my favorite part is actually registering for the Congress, because you have delegates coming in from all over the world. Those of you, if you spend time in Israel, you have a sense of the diversity of the Jewish people as you walk the streets. Here, it's like in the antechamber of the conference center, and you've got, like, you meet this person from Russia and that person from Uruguay and that person from Australia, and it's just really, it does really feel like the ingathering of the exiles in a really, really thrilling way. So to do it online in 2020 felt a little bit, it feels like how great that we can do it, and it's not the same richness. And so, kind of to make up for it, they did a special convening in 2023 in around Israel's 75th anniversary. That was mostly symbolic, but it absolutely shaped this current election, because and so this is on the regular, back on the regular 5-year cycle. What happened in the 2020 elections, and we really saw it played out when we came together in person in 2023, is that what Elliot just described is exactly what happened after the elections. And I'll say a little bit more about the election process after making this point. After the elections, we all do caucus, all of the allied folks caucus together very, very well. And in 2023, I was we had the Reconstructionist movement ran with the Reform Movement in 2015 and in 2020, And I was a whip on one of the, you divide into committees and there are resolutions that get considered, and I was a whip, and we had extraordinarily good communication. And what happened was that was the first time, and again, I really want to try to keep this as positive as I can. That was the first time that elements from the Haredi community ran in the elections for 2020, which determined who was at the table in 2023. Now, what's challenging about this is that most Haredim are not what we conventionally call Zionists. They believe that Israel will be reestablished as a kingdom through God's efforts and through the coming of the Messiah, not through human efforts through political means. So for that reason, since 1897, they were not a part of any of these World Zionist Congresses, and they didn't participate in a very in any of the associated agencies that are funded through this. And what happened in the build up to 2020 is that leaders, and there's division within the Haredi community about this, but there were some leaders who spotted both the amount of money that flows through these channels and some of the policy decisions that emerge out of these channels. So, remember those halcyon days when Netanyahu seemed to be engaging with liberal Jewish leaders in around the egalitarian section of the Western Wall of the Kotel? Well, that happened through these auspices, and that happened through the Jewish Agency, and representation on the Jewish Agency are through these elections. There are a couple of different ways to get onto to gain power in the Jewish Agency, but these are one of them. And so the Haredi communities, the Haredi leaders, in addition to identifying the money, also were concerned about some of the policies that were frequently championed by world Jewry, which tends to be overwhelmingly non-Orthodox. And so they gained significant numbers. And in 2023, those committee meetings that I spoke about, we prevailed. That super slate of all of the different slates coming together, we prevailed in the committees. And so it looked like as things moved to plenary vote, we would prevail at everything that we wanted to. And so the more small C conservative forces stymied the elections. Completely stymied them. So we were actually not, they held them up. We were late for an address by the president of Israel because they just completely stymied the elections. So it kind of, we ended up completing them online, just like in 2020 during the pandemic. We had the technology, we knew how to do it because we had to do it by necessity. This was because of political machinations. So it really highlighted that this election, like so much of our world right now, the stakes are really high. What are the values that we want to prevail? What is the vision that we want to bring to life? And so that is why you are receiving email after email from us and probably from other organizations that you're associated with. And that's why you'll see ads in Jewish newspapers about, vote in the election, because all of a sudden the stakes are so much clearer to diaspora Jewry. Is any point you want to make, Elliot, or should I?
No, maybe we should go through the slides.
Okay. So the amazing collection of folks who make up the Hatikva slate pulled together a really wonderful slide, a slide deck that answers some of the critical questions. I think we've covered a lot of these bullet points and what we've already talked about. I think Elliot did a great job of hitting all of these points.
One thing that somebody asked a question about that's noted. So it's not, let's just say the Hatikva slate got, I don't know what, 10% of the American vote. So the American vote is, I think, somewhere around, we're not the whole vote because this is the World Zionist Congress. So we're a section of the broader international Jewish community. But even if it ended up that we were in control of, I don't know what, 10% of the seats, and that's probably not quite the case. It's not like we would have then direct control over 10% of that $1 billion a year. Rather, we would be able to use our votes along with the rest of that body, just like a Congress or just like a board, to try and determine how that $1 billion each year gets allocated.
Absolutely. So here are the many amazing organizations that make up the Hatikva slate. Many of these organizations are members of the Progressive Israel Network, of which Reconstructing Judaism was a founding member. Not all of them. There are organizations, including the National Council of Jewish Women, that are not a part of the Progressive Israel Network, but they feel most closely aligned with our platform. Somebody asked about like the difference between a slate and a platform. It's all on the website. When it comes down to voting, you're voting actually for the slate of who's going to show up at the Congress. But as you can look at this either on the Hatikva website or on the American Zionist Movement's website, you can peruse the platforms of all of the slates. The slates simply refer to it's like the Knesset, where however much of the percentage of the vote you get, that's how many people are seated. So every slate is 120 people, and depending on how many votes we get, those people at the top, those you know, that proportion of 120 will actually go to the Congress. So next slide. So what are the national institutions that are populated by the results of these elections? You see that the national institutions are three. It's this column of organization. There's the World Zionist Organization that sponsors, like the names are close enough that sponsors the World Zionist Congress. I was talking about the Jewish Agency for Israel, the Sochnut, that was established before the state, and it focuses mostly on they're the group that bring the shlichim who come to our communities and our camps. If someone makes aliyah, that the Jewish Agency helps to absorb them, and they do they do a lot of education. The Ministry of Education of the government does. It's kind of like it was a quasi government before the state, and it remains a quasi-government working in partnership with the state on certain functions. And then also Keren Kayemet LeYisrael, known as Jewish National Fund, not exactly the same as JNF here in America. And so those are the three national organizations. The World Zionist Congress, the elections determine representation on the World Zionist Organization, and then through that I am on the Jewish Agency board as a World Zionist Organization delegate. It's very, very, as I said, very opaque. I have spent a lot of time trying to figure this out. And I didn't create this slide, but this is about the extent of my understanding. And I'm, as I said, the deputy chair of the Committee on Governance, Ethics, and Standards of the Jewish Agency. It's very opaque. Elliot, do you want to add anything before I go on?
Let's go to the next slide.
I think that you did a great job of presenting this. Is there anything?
Right. This is a lot of what I was talking about, but just to take another moment there and note, you know, what's at stake. And it's not, if you want to end the occupation, it's not that this election will end the occupation. That is not true. But this election is going to have the ability to put people into power who can create policy that will make that more likely, that will support the work of people who are trying to end the occupation, that will hold on to that as a goal and as a priority. And likewise for protecting the rights of all the inhabitants of the land, and likewise for making sure that people are kept safe and able to be in their own homes and securely and work securely.
And I'll share with you that when I've been to the congresses, you know, it is folks who make up the Hatikva slate. It is folks with whom we're closely allied, like the Artsa folks or the Merkaz folks. These are the only people who are talking about non-Jews living in the land of Israel. They talking about Palestinians, talking about Bedouins, talking about Druze. There's the expansiveness of the vision and the insistence that if we're going to be talking about Zionism, we have to be talking about the well-being and the aspirations of everyone living in the land. That's how rhetorically and the way that language shapes concepts and ideas, where it gets brought to life. It has to do with where the dollars are oriented, what is funded and what we're able to stop being funded. I'll give you a very clear example. The Jewish National Fund, Kakal, is only supposed to be spending its monies within the determined borders of the land of Israel, which at this point in time, it was within the Green Line. And there is a lot of evidence that over the last several years, the Kakal has been trying to spend their monies in the West Bank, in Judea and in Samaria, how they tend to call it. Now, there are other sources of funds, including through the government itself, but Kakal is not supposed to be spending that money that way. And it is through our representation that we're able to ensure that that guardrail is observed and that those funds are not expended. So it's both about what is, what is funded and also what is not funded. The next slide talks about, presumes that we have convinced you. And that, and really what I would say more than anything is this is a get out the vote effort. Please vote. Even if there's another slate that calls to you more powerfully, please vote, claim your voice. And we're this presentation talks about what you can do beyond your own vote, which is about sharing, spreading the word with other people. Elliot, do you want to talk about that third bullet?
Yeah, well, I want to just state really clearly. So first of all, I just put in the chat the link to vote. So if you haven't registered to vote or haven't voted yet, there's probably people on this call who already have voted, but why don't you just do that right now while you're listening to us? Just do it this moment. And then take that link, and it's quite important that you share it with other like-minded Jews. And just as Rabbi Waxman was saying a few moments ago, it's sure, we would love to have people vote for Artsa. We would love to have people vote for Merkaz. We really want to have the vision, the breadth of progressive Jews in America voting in the largest numbers possible. That is completely true. But we also want you, the only way that's going to happen is if you bring your family, your friends, your synagogue members, your Chavarah members into this process. So the next best thing you can do after voting yourself is to forward this link and forward your own enthusiasm for voting to people who you think might vote, and then to follow up with them and ask them to vote right now so that we can be a part of helping to define a progressive Zionist vision.
And what I think is one of the things that I find most inspiring about this whole process is, people have lots of, either they have lots of ideas of what Zionism is or isn't, or they have no idea what Zionism is or isn't. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to articulate what a progressive Zionism is, and to do it in partnership with these other extraordinary organizations, and to have it be more than just rhetoric, but something very, very concrete that we can do. And so here, again, to just reiterate some of the points that we've made, with your vote, with your participation, it has to do with funding. It has to do with strengthening coalitions and partnerships, ensuring that an egalitarian and an equitable vision is brought to life, and more and more and more.
Yeah, there's a question in the Q&A about which I'm going to just address, not specifically, but broadly, about, hey, we're concerned that the World Zionist Congress is essentially a more conservative-leaning organization, and as progressives or as people who question some of the more traditional values of that organization, should we participate? And the answer is yes, you should participate, because those are values that are handed down to us, but they're also values that can change. We are it is a living, breathing, changing organization. Even this is, I think, my third time being on the slate, and things have already changed, even though I haven't had an opportunity to participate in the Congress itself. Even as a slate member, the first time I participated, I had to make a donation to JNF. And JNF is a little bit of a controversial organization in some circles. This time I made a donation to the Arava Institute, another environmental organization. That is a change that has happened in the last 10 years. So if you are saying, well, I'm not sure if this organization represents me, that's why you should vote, because your vote for Hatikva will make sure that this organization is more aligned with your values.
Excellent. So thanks so much for raising the $5 contribution. So it's kind of like the shekel, the chetzi shekel that everybody needs to participate. And as Rabbi Tepperman just said, like it used to be that again, this is where I talk about like old school non-transparent organizations. It is not clear to me why any organization needs a contribution, because I don't think these contributions necessarily fund either the elections or the Congress. And it is a huge accomplishment that the $5, which is that fourth bullet down, and we now have, you can designate where it goes. The decision was that it should be something for the land itself. And so the Arava Institute does extraordinary work in the south of Israel. It has a very serious commitment both to sustainability and coexistence. And so I was very, very proud and pleased to have to give them some additional funds that way. If you have the third bullet, azm.org elections, I will share with you that when the voting started on March 10th, I'm sad to say that the platform was very, very, very glitchy. We had nothing to do with it. This is an AZM challenge. I believe it has been sorted out now. I got many, many emails from folks over within the Reconstructionist movement over the first couple of days saying I tried many, many times. If you have any problems, please write to us and we can give you an email where and if I can find it before the end of this, I didn't think to call it up, I can drop it into the chat and where you can contact AZM directly and they will make certain that your vote goes through. That's it. We are slate number 16 and you are able to go back and forth. If you want to take a screenshot or call up your camera, you can in addition to just clicking through to the link, the QR code will take you there right now. So I will stop sharing.
There's another question in the Q&A about the importance or in the platform of the slate in weakening the Haredi or weakening the impact of the Haredi. I guess I would say it differently. The slate is dedicated to creating a truly pluralistic Judaism in Israel, full stop. So we're not against there being Orthodox Jews. There can be Orthodox Jews. The Orthodox Jews just simply should not have the right to determine how anybody else celebrates their Judaism, or for that matter, chooses not to celebrate their Judaism. You should be able to be completely non-religious in Israel if that's what you want. And you should be, as anywhere else, we want all of the stripes, all of the ways of being Jewish to be protected and to be celebrated. And that's really what we're dedicated to. To the degree that we want to weaken them, it's only to the degree that they're using their power to compel their specific vision onto the broader Jewish people. That we're interested in weakening. We're not interested in stopping people from being Orthodox Jews in any stripe, whether it's Haredi or otherwise.
I think that's exactly right. That is, as someone who got to weigh in on the creation of the slate, we worked as hard as we possibly could to put it in affirmative language. I will say that I think it's fine to say this. We ran, the Reconstructionist movement ran with the reform movement, with ARTSA and with Artsenu, which is the worldwide reform movement, for the last 2 elections. And it was a very, very considered decision this time about whether, it's lovely. I will say it's very lovely to be courted. And so the Hatikva slate wanted us to run with them both in the last election and in this one, as did the ARTSA slate. And I will share with you that there are a couple reasons why the leadership of the Reconstructionist movement thought that it was the best thing to run with the Hatikva slate. One is that these are leaders of the Reconstructionist movement are in very regular contact with the leaders of liberal Jewish denominations all the time. And through the Progressive Israel Network, especially around Israel, the members of the Progressive Israel Network are our closest allies. And you heard me explain Rabbi Tepperman's multiple ties through J Street and also through Troa. Like the interpenetration is very, very strong, and the collaboration is very, very strong. Also, part of our assessment is getting out the vote in the United States, and it really is the United States. Canada has a separate process, even that though we tend to talk about ourselves as a primarily North American movement. This conversation is exclusively for communities who are affiliated with the Reconstructionist movement, or individuals who identify as Reconstructionists within the United States. I was going to say the 50 states of the United States. It has to do with the World Zionist Organization's rules for all of the different elections, and it is a much the reform movement. The question that came up earlier about like, well, what about the platforms? There is a tremendous amount of overlap, and also their platform is very significantly around through the lens of Reform Judaism and in the service of strengthening the reform movement in Israel. And that has, in the past, made it harder to mobilize Reconstructionists in the States to vote. And part of our assessment was, we know that we will caucus together in the actual Congress, and that the most important thing right now was to mobilize as many people as possible in the service of this affirmative vision. And that is a much easier case to make as part of the Hatikva slate than it is to explain, well, it's the reform slate, vote reform, but the Reconstructionists are also there. Very, very pragmatic in recognizing what the stakes are and where our greatest leverage is, which is in this election cycle.
Deborah, there's a question about what the source of the $1 billion a year in funding is. I don't actually, maybe you could speak to that.
I thought she added a slide. Give me, if you want to tell a story or something, because I actually, well, you know what? It is in the slide, I think. What is the source? Give me 1 second, because
Okay.
this is not the first time that question has come in, and I have a partial answer, but I got to go into my email to find it. So I'll put myself on mute and
maybe while we're doing that, someone could address the question about Canada, because I know we've had some other questions.
Right. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I think that Rabbi Waxman was just speaking to that yes, Canada has its own process. This is right now what we're inviting you to participate in is the United States process. So if you are some people hold dual citizenship. I'll let you make your own choice as to what is the right thing to do, or sort of have a foot in both places. But if you primarily identify as Canadian, then you're going to need to do a little bit of figuring out to see what is the closest partner there. I don't believe Hatikva is running in Canada. So I think you're going to have to look for another partner that shares our values. So hopefully that helps for that question. I do want to just invite you again during this moment to make sure that you are actually going and voting. I see some people are trying. Somebody's saying, "Hey, it asked for my PIN." So you're going to have to search through your emails. If you already registered, you were sent a PIN, and if you search, World Zionist Congress or AZM, you will be able to find that in your emails. And if you just registered right now, then just wait. I don't know if it takes 5 minutes or one day or how long it takes until you get that pin. But as soon as you get that pin, that's what allows you to vote. And that's part of how they keep track of who's actually voting. And it's as best as possible to try and make sure that people are only voting once.
And I have the answer. This comes from Nomi Colton Max, who is one of the co-chairs of the Hatikva Slate. She's working tirelessly on this. And what she said is, she's spent a lot of time trying to track this down, and there's still information. This speaks to some of the opaqueness that I was talking about. She said that the Jewish agency budget is usually about $420 million, though they do special fundraising campaigns. And right now they're in the midst of a special fundraising campaign for rebuilding the South. And that comes from individual philanthropists and from foundations. The budget of the World Zionist Organization is about $40 million. I don't think she gave me what the budget of Kakal, of the Jewish National Fund is. So a huge source of funds comes from Kakal for all three of these national organizations. They have, if you recall from the slide that I had up earlier, they are the largest landowner within Israel. And some of that is undeveloped and are national parks, but there are fees to get in. And so that's one income source. And some of it is developed land, and they tend to own the buildings on that developed land. So they have a tremendous amount of rental income. So they are a huge engine, but I'm not certain. But Nomi was working hard to try to get to look at the budget of the Jewish National Fund. They provide allocations to the other two national organizations. The World Zionist Organization, with the $40 million budget, almost all of it comes from Karen Kayemet L'Israel, from the Jewish National Funds, which means that they're both they're separate, but they're also intertwined, which doesn't help with the transparency and creates webs of obligations that are not always good. So the Jewish Agency gets a good chunk of its funding from not so much from Kakal. They get 30% of their funding comes from the Jewish Federations of North America. So when you make a contribution to your local federation, or if you make it to the Jewish Federations of North America, unless you designate it otherwise, some portion of it is going to go to Israel. I will say that the Jewish Federation of North America is pushing very hard for greater transparency of where their money is going. They also get funding from Karen Hayesod, which is also a pre-state institution that's funded by the government now, about the well-being of activities and of Jews in the land of Israel. And the Jewish Agency also gets a good deal of funding from foundations from around the world. So again, I'm being imprecise because that's the most that Nomi was able to uncover in response to an earlier iteration of this question.
So we might be, close to wrapping up. I don't want to jump the gun here if there's anything that needs to be said, but I do want to reiterate to you again that even though there's parts of this process that might feel a little bit opaque and old, here's the simplest truth is this: money has been raised. It will be allocated. We have the power to impact how that's allocated. It will be directly related to how many votes we get. So most of you can do far more than voting. If you haven't voted yet, vote right now. Your learning how to vote is going to then help you be able to bring other people into voting. And that's the second way. Again, if you think about the impact of, the American election, there were probably not that many people whose vote was on the line that you knew, or not that many people who were in your friend groups or in your families who you were worried that person doesn't care enough to vote. This is not like that. There are probably dozens, if not hundreds of people that each person on this phone call knows who could vote, who don't have it on their agenda right now. You, in your loving, caring, kind way, could say, hey, I know you care about Israel. I know you care about human rights. I know you want to see peace in Israel. I know you want to see pluralism in Israel. And you feel free. This is a campaign. You can say the thing that the person you're talking to needs to hear. I'll tell you what we're going to do right now. Before we start having coffee, you're going to put it on your phone right now and you're going to vote. You're not leaving this until we vote, right? Or you can call somebody up on the phone and say, hey, did you vote yet? You actually have that power. Or post it on Facebook if you're on Facebook. Or if it's easier to send a mass email, send a mass email. But unlike many things in life where we're not sure whether we can have an impact, this is a place where you can very much amplify your own ability to be impactful right now around something that just by the fact that you showed up to this conversation, I already know you care about. So I'm inviting you to take that time to maybe make a plan at this moment. Who am I going to reach out to? What's my, speech going to be to get them to vote? Who do I think I can influence? Where is the low hanging fruit, and go for it. And maybe because you do that, I'll get to accompany Deborah on her next trip to Israel, so that because of the impact that our movement has.
How inspiring. Too bad I've already voted. Otherwise, I would go and do it right now. If you please, if they do not make it easy, I do not understand why. Please persevere. It is really important. It is really worth it. We will be reporting out. We will be, when the time comes, we will do everything we can to bring everybody with us, to share the proceedings, to share the outcomes, to share the impact that we're seeking to have here. So thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Elliot Tepperman. Thank you again, Nina and Rachel, for your help and your support. Thanks to all of you for showing up, for your patience as as we pulled everything together, and thanks for your attention and your care, and for your vote. And it's a little early, but Chag Sameach, happy Passover.